Hey everybody, and welcome to rabb1t's Ramblings, podcast 417. This time I don't have a lot to say, I just have a few thoughts about Path of Exile 2's early access, and that's it for this time. Hopefully you enjoy the show. So this will just be pretty much a quick overview. You can get tons and tons and tons of information, all very in-depth about the Path of Exile 2 early access, pretty much in any search on YouTube. But for my personal quick thoughts, it has definitely been kind of exactly what I expected in terms of changing from Path of Exile 1 to Path of Exile 2. With Path of Exile 1, you want to pretty much sink a bunch of stuff into one or two skills, and then you're spamming entire screens of bad guys as fast as you can. And one of the things they said they were going to change with 2 was not do that and be a more slow and deliberate pace where you're kind of, I don't know if I'd say being more careful about how you fight, but certainly paying attention to things like enemy position, where they're moving, which kind of bad guy is where. And so you are keeping track, especially if you're melee, about what kind of bad guy is where and where you're going to position and how you're going to move to avoid things. And it is very definitely deliberate, I've heard some people call it. So I am very happy about that. That was one of the big things that I do not like about ARPGs in general, when they're just run as fast as you can and spam the screen. I have zero interest in those kind of games. So I am very happy with the pacing overall of Path of Exile 2 from what I've seen so far. I have played about 40 hours, but I have bounced back and forth between pretty much kind of 3 characters, 2 of which I've sunk probably most of the time into, probably, I'd guess, maybe 10 or so hours each, which I guess isn't a whole lot of time if you add it all up separately by character. I think my highest level character is level 28. I have not gotten through Act 2 yet. I'm still somewhere in Act 2. I haven't gotten further than that, so I don't know how much is left. I'm probably almost done with it, though, I think, at this point. They have also kind of, I guess, simplified it, though probably more streamlined than simplified, in that all of these skills come from gems, and the gems are now tied to specific weapons. So like one of my favorite abilities is when you build up enough stun, you can do this move with a hammer, which hits the bad guy really hard and then makes like an explosion around them. So what happens is you build up some stun, do the exploding move, and then that exploding move will usually build up enough stun on other guys, so then you just kind of explode. And that is really cool, but you have to have a hammer, either one-handed or two-handed. So it's not at all built into class, because it never really was with Path of Exile. It's all about what skills you want to use. But now it's what skills and what weapon does that skill need. So you're a little bit more limited in that you can't make, completely crazy, choose everything kind of builds, because you can only have a certain number of weapons. I suppose the most you could have would be 4 if you're using both bars for single hand weapons, but I don't think it's quite that extensive. I do think the most you could probably realistically do would be about 3, but I guess we'll see, because part of the limitations of early access is that only half of the weapons, and thus half of the classes, are actually in the game right now. So I know the ones that are missing are at least spear, dagger, sword, axe, and I think there's one of the caster type weapons that's also missing. So a lot of stuff those people who are used to playing Path of Exile 1 would normally see is just completely not in the game at all. And that is one of the biggest downsides, I would say, of the game right now. Being early access, it is not finished yet. So a lot of classes and playstyle are missing. And, like I just said, all of their weapons and the skills that go along with those weapons are also missing. That isn't to say there isn't enough to have fun with. There certainly is. I'm having a great time. But also missing are some of the campaign areas. There are currently only 3 acts, as they call them, of what will eventually be 6. So I don't know. When I get to the end of Act 3, I might just, stop playing and maybe, try a different class or different weapons instead of cycling back through a second run of Act 1 and 2 and 3, which is what you can currently do to get to the end game. I might just be like, okay, I don't want to go past this right now because what I'm trying to do is learn, which class I like and which weapons I like, and I don't need to go, all the way to endgame and grind through endgame to figure that out. I can just wait until they polish that out a bit more. One thing that doesn't really work for me, which might be a problem for you as well, depending on how you play, is that one of the changes they made is that you have 2 weapon sets. And pretty much like every game on the planet, whenever you swap weapon sets, your brain thinks, the abilities you use would also swap with them, which is exactly how it works in Path of Exile 1. I would very commonly in Path of Exile 1 play Ranger, and then I would have my bow on one bar and then swap over and have dual wield on the other bar. So I'd have basically range on one bar, melee on another bar. I suppose a good thing for Path of Exile 2 is that you don't need to do that. You have your bars, and then you put whatever skills you want on those bars, and when you trigger an ability, it will automatically swap to the weapon set that ability needs. Like, say you have dual wield melee weapons as your main, and then you want to use a bow attack, you just press the bow attack button and it will automatically swap and do the bow weapon and then swap back as soon as you press another melee ability. So that is good, I think, for most people. I think most people that will work just fine. But for me, that kind of really breaks a lot of what I normally play with. Because as I said, normally I will have something like dual wield on one bar and then ranged on the other bar. And then when I swap, the basic ability will also swap with it, which kind of is very problematic because now that doesn't work. Because previously, with mouse and keyboard, that means I would set up my left mouse as the main, sort of spammable ability, and then the right mouse is the primary special ability for each of those sets. So with melee dual wield, it'd be melee strike, melee strike, melee strike on left button, and then maybe some kind of AE strike on the right button, or flip over to bow. Now it's bow single attack, pew, 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 and then swap over and do like an AE attack with the right button. But with Path of Exile 2, you cannot do that because when you swap weapon sets, you don't have a second bar. It's all just the one bar. And it's also problematic because for people who are, I guess, like me, and considered, a one-handed /shield option on one of those bars, that's also just not going to work because for me, with something like Elder Scrolls Online, the right mouse button is block. So if you're maining one-handed shield, that works fine. But if you have, say, ranged on your back bar, and you want to use range as your main, you can't use the right mouse if you ever want to block because it doesn't swap hotkey bars now. You always have to lock in those abilities where they are, and that's it. They don't ever change. So things like melee and range, and trying to do them and use, the primary abilities of both becomes really difficult because the buttons, at least for mouse and keyboard, become kind of problematic because you're using your left hand for moving and then you're using your right hand for the two abilities, maybe more if you have more buttons than that. But then trying to do any other abilities is really problematic. So I don't know if this is explained well in this section, but it is very difficult to do. So you kind of have to rethink how you're doing things if you're like me. It is early access, so there always is the possibility they're going to add that in later, and then that would be perfectly fine. If it had an option to have a second bar, then it would be great, and that problem would be removed. But until then, if you're like me and you have hybrid between ranged and melee, you're going to have to rethink which one you want as your main. And then, I don't know, maybe if you're maining melee, you can put a ranged basic attack on middle mouse button. That's not the worst, but I don't know. My mouse currently has to use scroll wheel as the middle mouse, and that's the worst thing ever. So that's not great. Another personal side note, which is, totally personal to me, is that I really don't like the way they've got mercenary set up with crossbow, because their primary shot needs to reload, which, reloading is fine, whatever. There's a slight delay. You shoot, you reload, you shoot, you reload. You get used to that. It does feel really slow, but you can get used to it. And there's higher level things that do add more shots. I haven't seen more than 2 or 3 shots go off, so that's still kind of a pain. But the problem I'm finding with that is that when you're fighting something like a boss and you have to dodge, the dodge can interrupt what you're currently doing. So with a bow, it's like you shoot and then you dodge, and then you shoot and then you dodge, and then you shoot and you dodge. And if you time it just right, you can get those shots off. But with mercenary and crossbow, since it has that reloading, he's going to shoot, and then he's going to start to reload, and then you're going to need to dodge, and then you're going to be done dodging, you're going to try and shoot again, but you haven't finished reloading, so you need to reload again. But then the boss comes and you need to dodge again, and then you need to reload again, and so you don't get those shots off. That becomes really painful. I was not expecting that with the reload system to be as much of a problem as it is. Most of the time you can get around it, it's not too bad, but there are some times where that delay just really frustrates me. And another one that kind of made me rage quit mercenary for a long time is that all of those crossbow shots are now this new thing called ammunition. And instead of pressing the button and having it immediately do what it's supposed to do, like there's this cone ice shot that they can do, which I thought was really cool. I'll use that. What you do is you press the cone ice shot button and it loads it into the crossbow, and then you use your primary fire button, which for me is left mouse button, to fire it. So instead of it firing on, say, the E button, I now press the E button to load it into the left mouse button, and then I fire it with the left mouse button, which means when I want to use the basic attack, I have to press something like right mouse button to load the basic attack back in, and then press the left button again to fire the basic attack. And to me, that just gets really confusing, because especially when you have more than 3 ammunition types, you're pressing the ammunition button, you're pressing the left mouse button all the time. It's very confusing to me. And again, it adds this extra delay that I'm really not happy about. So I'm forcing myself to go through with mercenary because I like the idea of mercenary. I don't use any different ammunition types, so I never have to swap ammunition. But then I'm like horribly crippling my build because I have 2 or 3 different cool things I could be doing, but I'm not doing them because it's just so confusing to me to press the button that I want it to shoot, and then I don't shoot it, and then I have to press the left button all the time for everything. Just very counterintuitive. So I don't know. Personally, right now, I'm leaning towards using mercenary just as a base for their ascendancy and their starting position on the tree, and then not using crossbow at all, which is weird because that's the weapon that's designed for them. But, again, that's just a whole personal thing. But I can't really think of too much to say. Path of Exile 2 Early Access, I do like it quite a bit. I do like how skills are now paired to weapon types. That does make things a little bit easier to understand, I think. Certainly feels far less tempting for me to stray into, ooh, I want this, ooh, I want this, ooh, I want this, and then my build is just mishmashed everywhere. Because you do really need to focus in on very specific stats, and if you take too many different abilities, your stat requirements get spread out too thin, and then you can't get them high enough to use higher level things, and then that becomes problematic, and that you don't ever do any damage. So I think tying them to specific weapons helps people focus in. But do know, when you start playing, that there is a button you can press that shows just all of the gems, especially for support gems. This can become very important because it will only recommend a very small number for the particular skill you are using, but it can take a lot more than that. So if you want, of course, only experienced Path of 1 players will probably know what they want in advance. Path of Exile 2, you'll have to figure it out over time. But once you start to get it, you'll figure out what you want, and then just remember that button is there and you can go look for it. And I do like that system quite a bit more than the Path of Exile 1 system, where you had to actually find the gem in question or purchase it from a specific vendor. Now it's just boom, you have it and you get what you want, and that's a much better design. But again, with only half of the classes and I think roughly half of the weapons in, there's still quite a bit missing, and I think my personal playstyle of melee with ranged support options isn't really viable with the options that are out there right now. I am having a super fun time with it, but like I said, I might just put it down after going through those first 3 acts and then not repeat them and not get into endgame, because I'm using things that aren't quite matching to my playstyle. Pretty much the characters that are in is Warrior, which puts you in Hammer, which is 100% strength build. And then there's Witch, which I believe is 100% intelligence build. I don't really have any interesting casters. There's also Sorceress, which I think is also pure int. There's Ranger, which is pure dex, which I have a Ranger. I like her okay, but not being able to push into melee that I like is not a great option for her. And then there's a new one, which is Monk, which I think is Dex and Intelligence split. I tried the Monk for about an hour and I just got wrecked. I was dying all the time, and I'm like, no, this is the worst. So definitely not for me, but it might be for those of you listeners who are into that sort of quicker, fragile, but kind of flexible playstyle. But that's not me. At least not yet. I might go back and try it again later, but in the quick peek I did not like them at all. But it's missing probably the one I will need, which is Duelist, which is also strength and dex like the Mercenary. But I don't know, I like the Mercenary Ascendancy quite a bit. I just really hate the crossbow. But I think the Duelist would use Sword and Axe, which neither of those are in yet. There's also the Shadow, I think it's previously been called, who uses daggers, which is, I believe, Dex and Intelligence. I tried Shadow in Path of Exile 1 for a bit, and I didn't like him. He felt too fragile and not really my style, because it had a lot of sort of poisons and dots, and I'm not really into that. I'm just sort of in the more smash him in the face and do damage immediately kind of playstyle. But I guess at this point, I'm just kind of rambling. So check it out if you want. I don't know that I would recommend it to everyone who has not played Path of Exile sort of very much, especially since right now you have to pay to get in to test out early access. I would say probably most people still just want to wait the 6 months to a year to do it free. If you are not sure, you would play at least a bit to justify the minimum $30 purchase. But if you have and you've enjoyed it in the past, you might want to get it, but I would probably recommend most people wait about 3 or 4 months until there's a lot more classes and a lot more weapons/skill options available, because unless you fit into those more pure styles, I don't know that your preferred style would be in there in the current form, but I do like it quite a bit. So that's it for this podcast. I guess I rambled way more than I thought I would. It's probably about twice as long as I thought I would go for. Hopefully it wasn't too rambly and you got the gist of things. But I guess that's it. I don't know what I'll talk about next time. Hopefully everybody will have a good Christmas time and New Year time. I guess the pause between this and next episode will cover both of those. So hopefully everybody will have a good and safe time. I have no idea what I'll be talking about next time, but hopefully I'll see everybody then. Okay, thanks, bye. You have been listening to Rabbit's Ramblings. If you would like to see the show notes or feed the bunny by sending a donation, you can find the show website at www.rabbit.com/podcast/rabbitsramblings.html. When you type Rabbit's Ramblings, don't use a space. If you would like to send me an email, you can do so at rabbit@rabbit.com. If you like my page, you can also post on Facebook at rabb1t's. You can follow me on YouTube at rabb1t's. I have a page on Patreon at www.patreon.com/rabbit, RABB1T. You can set up a monthly recurring subscription there at a price point of your choice. Be sure to put the number 1 in place of I anytime you type rabbit. Rabbit's Ramblings is copyright Eric Stryker, using a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Derivatives License, 2024.